Iran's supreme leader has accused the country's enemies of stirring days of protest that have claimed at least 22 lives. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was speaking for the first time since demonstrations began last Thursday. State media says 9 people, including a child, died overnight in clashes between demonstrators and security forces as authorities struggle to contain the biggest challenge to the country's clerical leadership since 2009. This report by our correspondent Richard Galpin.
The protests and the authorities' response to them are becoming increasingly violent. Buildings being burnt and shots fired. Last night, at least 9 people killed, including some members of the security forces. The focus of people's anger is this man, the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The spark for the protests, rising food prices and unemployment running at 60% in some areas.
People are actually fed up with political corruption, people are fed up with economic corruption, and they believe that the only way to pave the way to a meaningful change, a meaningful economic change, is through radical political reform.
One response of the authorities has been to hold big counter-demonstrations like this in many parts of the country. But the government's strategy also includes restricting access to the internet and placing the blame for what's happening on its enemies abroad. Today, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, spoke for the first time about the crisis since it began last week.
Following recent events, the enemies have united and are using all their means, money, weapons, policies and security services to create problems for the Islamic Republic.
The statement is a clear sign that this widespread unrest is rattling the clerics who've ruled the country for decades. This morning, the British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson called for meaningful debate about what he said were legitimate and important issues the protesters were raising, and said the government was looking to the Iranian authorities to permit this. But with the protests and violence continuing, that seems unlikely. Already, more than 400 people have been arrested. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Well, with me now is BBC Persian Service's Jaya Gol, and what seems different is the number of towns that are involved all around the country and the nature of the protests. What's the latest?
Well, in the past 24 hours, what we are hearing from the contacts on the ground, the footage we are receiving through social media and on the platforms on social media, what we are seeing, in the past 24 hours, we had around 14 towns and cities. Small town like Dehloran in the border with Iraq, all the way to capital city of Tehran. There have been unrest, and some of those small places, violent unrest, the clashes between security forces and protesters. And in some areas like the province of Isfahan, and small town there, people attacked the Basiji militia, part of Revolutionary Guard's bases. They attacked some of the offices belonging to Supreme Leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So in fact, what you are seeing in small town, as you said, Archie, is people are more angry, and the protests are, the protesters are attacking those buildings and bases of the security forces.
You talk about anger. The regime is blaming foreign interests for making this spiral as it has done. Do the tweets that we read from Donald Trump, which are in themselves quite angry, does that play into the regime's hand to some extent?
Most definitely, because, well, this is a typical accusation against those people who are out of favor by the regime in the past 4 decades. But definitely this kind of tweets, particularly President Trump, which is not popular among the reformists, among those who are opposing the regime, those who are supporting the regime, because they banned Iranian go to America. There is not a good perception about him in Iran. But this kind of tweets definitely plays in the hand of the regime and the leaders of the Iranian regime to say, listen, this is a foreign agenda behind this. This protest is not about demanding actually freedom or improving the life of people. This is some foreign power they're trying to stir up the situation and creating more problem for the regime.
Looking at what happens next, the fear must be that at some point the patience runs out in the regime and they will act.
So far, the protests are in small towns. It hasn't reached the major city, which is artery for the regime, like Tehran, like Tabriz, like Isfahan and other places. And obviously, it seems the security forces, they don't feel they should deal with it with heavy-handed, like 2009. So the Revolutionary Guard, which has all the tools, they have trained and have organizational in place to deal with this kind of protest, they haven't entered the game so far. And even they warn, if need be, they can finish it once for all. But if they attack people, what we are seeing is so far, more than 20 people have been killed in the past 6 days. It could add to the tension and create more chaos in the country. But again, I mean, we have to wait and see how many people come out and how would be the reaction of the government. Even the Supreme Leader today said, I will talk to you in the future, in the coming days, about the situation in details, but he didn't elaborate on what's going on in the country.
Briefly, the purpose of the Iranian Revolution was to bring fairness to the very people, it seems, who are now out on the streets.
Exactly. I mean, definitely, we don't know what is the result of this protest, but whatever is, it will be a defeat for the project of Islamic regime, because they came to power almost 4 decades ago with the slogan of creating the government, serving the poor, eliminating corruption in the government and in the society. And right now, very same people, the government is supposed to serve them, they are coming out in masses, accusing the government, accusing the top leadership of corruption, accusing many people say they are out. They just want to make sure they can take bread to the table for their kids. And definitely what we are seeing here is completely the failing of that slogan and failing of those promises 40 years ago.
Jar Gold from the BBC Persian Service, thank you very much.